We're going to get started. We are recording this. I'm thinking it'll be 30 to 40 minutes, hopefully, depending if there's a bunch of questions. Um, there is a ton of misinformation about mold, how to test for it, how to clean up, how to do things correctly. And it's because in certain states, like in Arizona, there's no rules, there's no laws. You could start a mold cleanup business tomorrow with no experience, no training, no certifications. Um, I am Kurt. I own Inspection Over Coffee. Why should you listen to me about mold testing? Is because I've done thousands of mold remediation jobs. I've been called in as an expert witness test to do testimonies. I do rebuttal type things for when you have some other company that did testing and it's maybe not quite right. So I'm going to give you the right answers on how to do this stuff. I am a licensed mold assessor in the state of Florida. The very first thing you should know is that, excuse me, if you're going to do testing in the beginning to see what kind of a situation you have, and then you're going to clean up mold, and then you're going to do testing afterwards. That would be the right way, the three steps, right? It should not be the same company. So you can imagine the bias that would come in if I say owned a company that cleaned up mold, right? But I also came in and said, oh yeah, we'll do the testing and see how bad the mold is. And then we'll tell you how much it should be cleaned up. And then, by the way, we'll check our own work afterwards just so that you know that you're in good hands. It's totally unethical. In the environmental world, that's not how things work. You have a separate, unbiased third party who will do the front end testing and the back end testing, no matter what kind of testing it is. The people that clean it up are a separate entity so that you don't have any of those biases. Another misconception with mold and mold cleanup is who is in charge of what gets cleaned up and what doesn't. In places like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, where there's licensing for this, the assessor, the person who comes in and does the initial assessment, is the person who writes up what needs to get cleaned up. And I'll explain why. If you're a homeowner, you're like, well, yeah, fix it all. If you're an insurance company, you're like, no, don't fix anything. We don't want to write a big check. And if you're the remediator who does the cleaning up, you have a financial bias to have the largest cleanup possible, right? So if I charge $500 to come in and do a round of testing, analysis, and all the things I'm going to show you today, I don't care if my recommendations is a $1,500 cleanup or a $15,000 cleanup, because I got paid my $500 to tell you what the story is. One other analogy I like to tell here, because people get all weirded out, right? They see mold under their kitchen sink and then they just kind of lose their mind. So if you take a step back from it and not be so emotionally charged when you see that, if you imagine going to the doctor's office, they draw your blood work, your cholesterol comes back a little high, initial evaluation, initial testing, right? So the doctor says, hey, you should probably, exercise a little more, eat a little healthier, and take this pill. Well, then what happens 3 months later? The doctor wants another round of testing to hopefully show that the cholesterol levels will come back down. So in the mold world, it's the same thing. Initial assessment, cleanup, post-assessment to show that it's all been cleaned up correctly. Here in Arizona, nobody recommends the post-cleanup. So what ends up happening is either people go in and rip stuff up. Let's say it's a flip. They tear out a bathroom that's all molded out. They don't take any of the proper precautions that I'm going to show you today. And then you and your client walk into this beautiful home. They did a pretty good job on the flip, but what you don't know is that there's all this airborne mold flying around from everything that they ripped up in that bathroom. And so that's why we would do some sampling. So let's see what I have next here. Okay, before I get to that, one other thing that sometimes people ask, they go, well, I mean, let's just say a window has a sprinkler spraying on it for a long period of time, and the water's come through the wall and there's mold on the wall. Well, somebody might go, well, why in the world are you going to charge me an extra $300, $400, $500 to do a mold evaluation? I mean, I can see that there's mold, there's water. We know that there's a problem and I need to clean it up. Yes, but the analogy I like to give is if you're going to spill a bag of flour in your kitchen and you're not going to clean it up for 3, 4, 5 months, where's that flour going to end up? So if I were to wait for an answer, you would say things like the floor, all flat surfaces, ceiling fans, your air ducts. You have to think of mold as the same way. Once it dries out and becomes airborne, it starts spreading throughout the house. So again, if I'm going to come in and do the evaluation, of course we know that there's mold on the wall. That's common sense, right? But the question is, how expansive is the problem? I have a 3-story house that I'm talking to you in right now. Is it just by that window in the kitchen area, or is it on the first floor? and on the third floor, and it's spread all around for several months because we didn't notice it. So that's why that initial evaluation is important, because it's hard for me to tell you how to clean it up properly if we don't take the samples that tell us how big the problem has become or how small it's become. So again, a $400 evaluation might save you thousands of dollars from that remediator coming in and telling you that you need to clean all 3 floors of the air ducts and all these other things that really isn't necessary. Again, but they're trying to create work for themselves. So, well, as I get started, I have Kristen on here with me. So hopefully you guys can put a name to a face. And if you call the office and you're scheduling something, she's the super friendly person on the phone who's going to help you out there. Okay. One of my biggest problems with mold and mold cleanup is that home inspectors basically go out and get a pump and sample kit, which I'm going to show you later. And then they start doing samples. And then they charge the same thing that we charge. And they give you, like, I'm just going to say it, they give you a shitty report. They basically give you a copy of the lab results. They give you a terrible 2-page version of what they did, which is like, I took a sample at 15 liters per minute and blah, blah, blah. But they don't actually give you any of the cleanup. They don't give you, hey, we found problems, this is a problem, that, and why? Because they don't know. They don't have any idea. They just learned how to use the pump and the air sample, and then they forward you the lab results and are like, good luck, man, it's your problem. I don't know what to do with it. Don't hire people like that. They charge the same thing that we do, but what the difference with us is we actually give you the full remediation protocol if we do find problems. We know how to interpret the lab results and to tell you whether there's a problem or there's not a problem, or there's potentially a problem that you can't be found right now. And so, how do I put this? Like, it would be hiring an electrician to come look at your electrical panel who can't actually, like, do the electrical work. You're like, well, if you can't tell me how to fix it, why would I listen to you about, like, what the problem is? Another thing to think is, if you went to the doctor and got your blood work done, but then afterwards, all they did was give you the results, no parameters, no highs, no lows, and no conversation with the doctor afterwards. And they're like, good, your oxygen is 6. Well, is that good? Is that bad? Does that mean I'm in trouble medically? Like, you're like, I don't know. I just do the blood work. So you really want to work with people that actually know how to clean the problems up and how to give advice to all the parties involved. Pet peeve of mine. So problem number 1, I see all the time. If you go to this website, you can just Google it, IAC2.org, mold inspection standards of practice. There is actually a long checklist of everything that we're supposed to check when we do a mold evaluation. Again, 90% of home inspectors have never even heard of this website. What they do is they come in, they do a little look around, they take their samples, and they send you the results. I actually did a home inspection, and the guy who was buying the house owned a mold remediation company. So he brought his team in to do a remediation, a pre-evaluation test, and it was missing all kinds of things. They had no idea what they were doing, and this is the guy that owns the remediation company. I kept my mouth shut, but I find that super annoying. So if you were to go to this website, you would see that it's pages and pages and pages. And basically what it is it's a water version of a home inspection. In other words, you're still supposed to look at for roof leaks, for rain gutter issues, for drainage issues. You look at all the plumbing, you look at all the HVAC. It tells you when you should consider this sample versus that sample. Should you take a 5-minute sample or a 10-minute sample? So it really does lay it all out. And again, most inspectors have never seen it. And so when they give you their mold evaluation report, what it actually says, instead of saying all of that, it says, well, here's the sample I took and how long I took it for and what I was running the pump at, and the pump was calibrated on such and such date. And you're like, none of that matters. Like, none of that needs to be put in a report. It just, none of that's important. What's important is that are the things that basically lead to mold, water problems, is there things that are happening now or things that you can prevent in the future? So if you go to that website and your client or, whatever, a buyer on one of your listings is using an inspector that doesn't know about this, you got to tell them they're wasting their money. Okay. So the first part of that website I was showing you was that evaluation, which is a visual. There should be photos, there should be videos. It should have the same defects that you expect to see in a home inspection: leaking roof gutters, loose toilets, missing caulk. What else? Let me think here. Broken faucets. Basically anything that can lead to a water problem down the road. I mean, as you probably know, I don't want to get too basic here, but all you need, we have a really dry climate. So sometimes in places like New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, people think, oh, we just don't have that big of a mold problem. But the reality is, mold is everywhere. If I were to take a sample right here, right now, there would be mold in the in the sample. So the question becomes: do we have indoor sources of mold? Neighbor's dog is going crazy. I don't know if you can hear that or not. But so the first thing we need to do is do that visual mold evaluation. Let's see here. Let's see. Okay. Second thing is we need to do technical measurements. This is going to be temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide. Obviously, if we had like 6 college students living in a dorm and they were all showered in the same area with no exhaust fan, that's going to create like really high levels of humidity. Sometimes if one of those air conditioners you put like maybe in a mother-in-law suite on the wall, those can blow out. If they're failing, they'll blow out like 98% humidity. For mold to grow, right, we know that we need water and we need a carbon source. So drywall, wood, etc. You're not sidebar here. You're not if you're in a really old home, like a 100-year-old home and there's a basement, and the basement is made of plaster. Plaster's not carbon based, so if you see water staining and discoloration, you're like, I wonder if that's mold. It's not going to be mold because the carbon's not. There's no carbon sources inside that plaster. Whereas if you're in an older home and let's say there's a little water leak or a humidity issue, and what you call it, the what's that stuff called? Well, wallpaper is there. That glue on the wallpaper is like pure carbon, and you could pull a little bit away, and like mold loves growing on there. So that's why we're looking at technical measurements, because if the humidity levels are out of whack, that will be the source of water. So you might not have a water leak, but if you have high humidity, so once you get to like 60-65% humidity, that is the source of water for mold to grow. Give you an example of what I saw. I had in Florida, I owned an inspection business, and we did a lot of mold work. And we would get called in. There would be snowbirds, and they would come back from the summer, and basically the air conditioner had broke for a month or two. So you're ending up with like 85-90% humidity in like a condo high rise, and basically you'd have a little thin layer of mold on like all the furniture and all of everything. So we'd have to do the whole evaluation, write it up, and then it was thousands of dollars to clean it. So that's the big difference between here and somewhere like Florida. If you clean it, let's just say I had a water leak on my ceiling and there was a little bit of mold and I didn't quite clean it up properly. Well, here, if the air conditioner breaks, we're not usually going to get to 60-65% humidity because it's Arizona. If this same house were in Florida and the air conditioner breaks, then the humidity comes back in the summertime, and then the mold will start to grow from the humidity. So that's the big difference. Okay, so once we've done the visual evaluation, technical measurements, we're then going to do what's called moisture mapping. So we take a thermal camera and basically scan every part of the house. You're looking for window leaks, ceiling leaks, plumbing leaks, roof leaks, any source of water that could be there right now. Trying to think if there's any, I mean, I've seen one where like the Freon line going through the wall was overly condensating, and there was all this like excess water in the wall from that. A thermal camera picked it up. You couldn't see any of it visually. All right. Any questions so far, Kristen?
So far, no. Let me see.
Right.
No.
So when you write up when you have a final, I mean, and again, I learned how to do this from environmental engineers and from industrial hygienists. So I'm going to take their word on how to do these things properly over, say, a home inspector with a pump. But so when you write up your conclusions in the report, it would say previous sources of water, yes or no. Active sources of water, yes or no. Elevated airborne levels, which we'll get to in a second, and then was there visible mold, right? So those are the 4 areas: previous water, current water, visible mold, airborne mold, okay? So then we're going to get to the sampling. This is where it gets to be a little bit fun here. Okay, so let's talk about the general rules of sampling where people make mistakes. You would almost never take samples in a crawl space, in an attic, in a garage, in the wall. 99% of the time, you take your samples in the living space, because really what we're doing is we're trying to determine air quality and the breathing air quality inside of our houses. You don't live in your attic, you don't live in your garage, and you don't live in your crawl space. So technically, those are considered exterior area rooms, because if you think of a crawl space, A lot of times they're vented, the air just goes through. The attic is purposely vented. None of that attic air or crawl space air, unless you have ducting problems, is actually getting into the house. That's not to say that if there's mold under the house or mold in the attic, it doesn't get cleaned up. It does, but it's not as significant of an event because it's not an indoor air quality breathing air problem. So here's what we do. I've got a pump right here. Looks like this. This is a wireless one. I'm sorry, a battery operated one. Excuse me. And you can see it here. So what we would do is we set this on a tripod. If someone's not putting on a tripod, again, that's a mistake. Basically, we put it on a tripod because we want to have it really close to the breathing level. And we set it typically for 5 minutes. And then we put this little sample on it. Here's my sample. Sample looks like this. We take the little tape off. Sorry, I've already used this one, but I'm going to pop it open again so you can see it. Come on. Save a piece of tape so we can cover it up. With me here. Okay, we got two sides. We have a flat side and we have a round side. The round side goes down and we hit our sampler and we take it for 5 minutes. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do one outdoor sample and then we're going to do at least 1 or 2 indoor samples. If it's a really big house, we might do more. You can actually do some research, and if you want to go super deep on this stuff, if this is like a thing that's for sure going to end up in court, you might end up with 3 outdoor samples. One, into the wind and one away from the wind and a third one. But again, it gets cost prohibitive for your typical homeowner because you're talking about $1,000 to $2,000 worth of sampling there. Whereas we want to keep this like $300, $400, $500. So once this is done running, we go ahead and we pull it off and then we seal those back up, seal up both sides. And basically we'll put that in a plastic bag with our chain of custody that says when we sampled, where we sampled, who we sampled for. And then we take those samples down to the lab. And what the lab actually does, what most people never see, is I've already cut it. Chrissy, can you see this well?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yes, I feel like you can see it pretty good.
So inside here is a microscope slide. A lot of people don't know this. Which side's sticky? This side's sticky. Okay, so that side, if we had let this run, there would be a thin line of debris on there. And it's the same debris that you see when the sunlight shines through your windows. And we can actually measure all kinds of things: fiberglass, insect parts, human skin cells, plant parts. Trying to think what else. There's a whole long list of things that we can actually test for. But in this case, we'll do it for mold. And there's a whole bunch of different kinds of mold. And basically, they put a little reagent on there, put it under the microscope, look at it 40 times magnification, 600 times magnification, and they're going to count how many little mold particles are on here. So that's the reason we kept track of the air, 15 liters per minute, I was telling you, because we want to tell them that we took 5 minutes, 75 liters. They do the math on how many cubic meters of air that is, and they say, okay, you had this many counts of cubic meters per counts per cubic meter of air. And then what we're really doing is we kind of like the levels matter a little bit, but what really matters is that the levels are significantly different or then significantly above what is outdoor levels. So that is an airborne sample. That is, again, 99% of the samples you're going to take. You could also take, if you have visual mold somewhere, you can take, that's a swab sample right there, or this right here is a tape sample. There's basically 1 square centimeter there. So you would just go up against the material that you're trying to test, push that up against there. And then again, they can look at it under the microscope and see what's going on in that 1 square centimeter. And because it's exactly 1 square centimeter, again, we could do the math to tell us kind of this is how many counts per blah, 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 right? And then what we get back from them, if you can see this is a recent one. In the wintertime, you don't have very high mold levels. But we have our outdoor sample, we have a first floor sample, and we have a second floor sample. So the first thing we look at is total counts, right? So here we had 720 versus indoors we had 90 and we had 90. And then what we want to look at is here we had aspergillus, 90 aspergillus, 40 aspergillus, and then here we had one raw count, so literally one speck of mold on that second floor sample, which equates to 40 per cubic meter. So again, this is why you cannot just interpret these lab results in a vacuum. You have to have the visual inspection, you have to have the moisture mapping, and you have to have the technical measurements. And this is 25% of it, so that we put all of that together. Because I've seen really crazy things happen. I've seen, aquariums that aren't well taken care of be the source of indoor mold. I mean, it doesn't have to just be a water leak. And you can have like a house that's really dirty, and you got mold and mildew in the shower areas. So again, this does not by itself constitute a problem just because you have some mold inside the house and that wasn't in the outdoor sample. You might have plants in the house that are the source of the mold. You might have, I'll tell a story later, you might have like moldy cheese or moldy bread. Like, so an indoor source of mold can really be lots of different things. It doesn't have to mean like, oh my gosh, I have a water leak. So let's see here. Okay, so air samples, tape samples, swab samples. What else are we going to talk about there? Okay, so sometimes I'll get something like this back, and here's the problem. It's not perfect, right? Because we had just a little bit of mold, which isn't zero, but also is not significantly high. Like these numbers, when you have a real mold problem, they're in the thousands, they're in the tens of thousands. In the summertime, these outdoor samples can be 6,000, 8,000. So people, again, your clients will be like, oh my God, it's 80. What is, and again, they don't have any parameters to go off of that. But in the summertime, 80 is nothing because it's the mold's everywhere, right? That being said, here's what we do when we have something that's like a slight elevation, and the rest of the inspection wasn't cause for concern. No old water leaks, no current water leaks, no active like mold. This still could mean that there's some kind of weird problem behind the scenes, behind the walls, inside the air ducts that we couldn't visually see that day. So what we have a write-up, and again, most people just ignore it. They just go, no, it's fine. But the write-up basically says, hey, you can do a quick wipe down with the HEPA vacuum of all flat surfaces, and then let the HEPA filters run for 2 days, maybe 3 days, and then resample. And that gets you to zero. So that's the totally by the book answer. Again, most people don't do it because usually this means nothing. But we have to write that up because when you do enough jobs, every once in a while, 6 months from now, somebody might go to replace their air handler and they pull it up and there's all of this mold down underneath the air handler because there was a condensate leak like in an area that was inaccessible in the house. And in that case, these very low levels did actually indicate a problem. It would have took destructive measures and invasive measures for us to have ever found that problem. So that's why we have to have that write up. So your final report should look like this. It should be a full, 30, 40 pages because there's lists of all of these defects in the house that are water related, plumbing and exterior and penetrations and drainage and water runoff from the roof and all that stuff. And then if you do find a problem, there should be a protocol. So in other words, don't pay $400 or $500 from somebody and for them to go, yep, you got elevated levels of mold. Well, now what? And they go, well, call a remediation company. They'll tell you what to do. No, they won't. They will tell you what they want to do, which is usually way more than what you need to do. And I literally just saw this 2 months ago with one of our top realtors. I already gave them the report. I told them exactly where the problem was. I gave them the protocol. And they said, well, we'd like to come in and do our version of testing. And, we test in the walls. And basically, they're like making up work for themselves. And so, one, they wanted to do $1,500, $2,000 of testing. And basically, they just wanted to tear the house apart and make up work for themselves. So, it's just wildly unethical and it annoys the piss out of me, to be honest. Okay. Any questions so far? Nope. Okay.
No questions.
Step one, everybody knows about this, right? You see a mold problem in a bathroom, under a window, roof, ceiling, whatever, how to clean surfaces. Okay, you have two types of surfaces. You have porous material and you have non-porous material. Porous material needs to just be replaced. Drywall is porous. Drywall is basically a kitchen sponge, right? Once you get water and mold in there, there's nothing you can do to fix it. You know, all the fogging and all that, it's all just nonsense, right? So just replace it. Like it's just like you could put your kitchen sponge out in the sun and it'll kind of give you buy you a couple more days, or you can like there's a million tricks you could try to do, right? Just replace the kitchen sponge. Like drywall should just be replaced. And then just so you know the numbers, if you had a problem like this, you would remove drywall at least 2 feet past where mold was found. So usually the source of the water is on the other side of the wall, right? It's a plumbing leak, it's a sprinkler head, it's a whatever. And so your answer usually is going to come as the remediators remove this. They need to be inspecting this and looking at the backside. And whatever the mold is on the backside, they got to go 2 feet this way, 2 feet that way, and 2 feet whatever. Now, on the inside the wall, there's 2x4s, there's framing. That doesn't need to be replaced. You can see the wood here. Basically, with wood and framing and all that stuff, you sand it and you seal it with an antimicrobial. If you've ever seen a house that had like fire damage or water damage, a lot of times you'll see maybe the trusses in the attic are painted like a white material. Most of the time, that white material is like a building epoxy with a antimicrobial in there. So whatever mold they couldn't get out of the wood can't start to go again. Okay, so that's surface cleanup. Now, almost everybody knows how to do this. Flippers do this. They tear out a bathroom and like get rid of all this stuff, cover up the moldy wood. But that's not the big problem. The big problem is you got to clean the air. So I literally had a problem right where my TV is here, and I just started going at it and started taking stuff and throwing it in the trash. What am I doing? I'm putting mold spores all into the air. And every time my heat or my air conditioner kicks on, it's spreading those throughout my entire house. So instead, what should happen is plastic over the area that is the known problem. Everything inside, all of the damage, the mold damaged materials gets bagged up, taken out of the plastic material inside their own bags. And then outside the containment and inside the containment is a HEPA filter right here, where we're basically cleaning the air. Mold is usually like 2 to 10 nanometers, which would be like 1,000th of a meter. So it's small, but it's not that small. So we can clean up most of it with the HEPA filter. If you ever have a source that the HEPA filters don't seem to be working well on, they do make these like $5,000 UV lights that will do a good job on it. Sometimes I get asked about those little UV lights inside the air handler. A lot of times they try to sell them to like your 85-year-old grandma. And she's like, oh my gosh, it's going to fix the mold. Like the problem is it's this big and the amount of air going over it, it's really just a $300-400 thing that doesn't do one bit of good. So the science behind it is correct, but the way it's being used most of the time, it doesn't do a lot of good. Okay, I talked about porous versus non-porous. So this is kind of it's a little fuzzy because I'm on a big screen here. But you could see here, like you would have a mold problem on the other side of the plastic. You got your HEPA filter. It's sucking air from the containment so that the air doesn't come into the rest of the house. It's going through the HEPA filter. A lot of times this HEPA filter is also a dehumidifier. And then you can see the line where it's running to the outside. So even the cleaned air is going to the exterior, not inside the house. And then not only what you can see here, but inside the containment, we would have, if we had to remove a toilet or a sink or anything like that, we would cover up all the drainage and sewer lines. We would, all the air registers get covered. So you might not want to hear this, but if you find this kind of a problem in your client's house and it's the middle of summer, they can't stay in the house because once you start covering up air registers, you're basically impeding the ability for the HVAC system to work. You got to turn off the AC system. It's 110 degrees outside. So in places where this kind of problem is covered with insurance proceeds, the client stays in a hotel and the insurance usually pays for it. Okay, I'm going to tell you the craziest story. So common mistakes, this is so funny. There's a reason that refrigerator's there. But common mistakes are things like they open up the walls for this problem in a window or whatever, and then the walls open to the attic or to the crawl space, as an example. And when they run that negative air with the HEPA filters, they're literally sucking air from the attic and from the crawl space, or one or the other, into the containment. So when we come back to do our post-remediation testing, we're literally testing attic air and crawl space air. And so they're not going to pass, the levels are not going to be back down below where they should be. I've seen people not pass these clearance tests because of like they removed the toilet, but it was like a do-it-yourselfer, and they didn't know to cover up the sewer line. So all of the nastiness from the sewer line is up in the air samples. The weirdest one I ever saw, I had just sold my my business in Florida, but of course I was still helping the guy. I was under contract to help for like 6 months, and there was some remediation companies that we work with, and he was doing the testing, and it was a kitchen issue where there was a leak, and every time they would fail the clearance test, the insurance adjuster would allow, like, okay, we'll remove that cabinet. Maybe the problem's behind there. Okay, remove that set of cabinet. So pretty much they got down to the what you call it, the like the bare kitchen. Like there was nothing left in the kitchen, and this was like probably, I don't know, like, I don't want to give a bad year, but like FaceTime was just kind of barely a thing. I know nowadays it's like, it's common, right? But back then it was, so we kind of set up a way to do that. And I said, well, bring me in. They failed 4 times, and they were really pissed because the remediator has to pay the $500 every time we show up, and then they end up not passing. And so that comes out of the profits at some, and then also if they become known as a remediation company that can't pass clearance tests, the insurance company's going to lose faith in them, and they won't send them business anymore. So it's bad for a lot of reasons. But so they put me on FaceTime, and I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. The whole kitchen is empty. You can see all the framing, all the cabinets are gone. And then all of a sudden I will go, whoa, pan back to that. And there was a refrigerator, and it was not plugged in. And I go, what's the refrigerator still doing there? I go, we couldn't fit it out the door. And they go, open it up. And they open it up, and it's full of all kinds of nasty rotting food. And so that was the indoor source of mold. So they weren't happy. But I said, look, man, we're stuck just reading what the air samples are and evaluating the place. We had no idea that you dummies unplugged the refrigerator and left all this rotting food in there for several weeks in the hot Orlando weather. So again, it's an indoor source of mold. It's a little bit silly, but you know, every little thing has to be considered when you're cleaning up, because your post remediation testing, you know, has to be that we could go to court and say, yes, beyond a shadow of a doubt, we know that all the mold was properly removed. So, all right. So this clearance testing I talk about, again, you have high cholesterol, you take some steps to remediate the cholesterol. 3 months later, you go back to the doctor, and doctor says, let's do another round of testing. We see the cholesterol come back. We all cheer and give ourselves a big round of applause, right? Clearance testing is the exact same thing, just for mold. We found a problem. We think we cleaned up the problem. Now let's come in and test again, and make sure levels are back down to where they should be. Now, there is no hard and fast rule. The levels do not need to be 0. It's actually, if you read the books, it says needs to be brought back to level 1 conditions, which is basically just like normal steady state conditions. So in other words, if I were to do testing in my living room here, I would have a certain level of mold. So as long as that the clearance testing wasn't excessive of that, then you'd be fine, and you can move on and take the containment down. But it's a visual inspection. The place should be clean. There shouldn't be VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds. If somebody used a lot of bleach to clean up mold, which again, the old wives' tale, bleach does work. It's just bleach is considered just as harmful to you to breathe in as mold is. That's why they don't recommend it. And basically, you know, so the basic premise of the clearance testing is, if I have plastic over this because we're cleaning up a mold problem inside here, the gist is it safe to take the plastic down, and whatever that mold problem was in here is totally gone, so it won't spread out to the rest of the house. That's it. That's the basic thing of it. So again, hopefully this has helped you understand, like, start to finish, mold, set some parameters for your clients, help coach them up, and understand that, listen, if you're buying a $600,000 house and you need $3,000 of mold remediation, if it's the perfect house, it's not the end of the world. Again, some people freak out. They think that mold is in the walls and it's going to kill us and we're going to have problems forever and ever. That's just not the way it works. So I tried to keep this down. We're at 37 minutes. Here's all our contact info. You hold your camera up to the QR code, you'll get our contact info. The things I always offer at the end of these classes are, obviously, if your clients have home inspection needs, environmental needs, and you want to know the right answers, we're happy to help you with those kinds of things. But also, you might be on the list side, and some other buyer's agent use some other inspection company, and they'll send me the report, and I'll go, Kurt, I don't know what I'm looking at here. What am I supposed to do about this? And sometimes I'm able to coach you up and help you get it done, and other times I go, well, like this is totally inconclusive because they didn't do parts of what I had talked about. They might do, I've seen them where they do like an airborne sample in the main bathroom, and then they do like a surface sample, and I go, that's not enough information to. But at least you can go back to them and go, look, you hired someone who did a piss poor job, and this is the information I would need in order to follow through on your requests about cleaning this up or getting quotes, or whatever the case may be. So I hope this was helpful, and I will open it up now for questions. I don't know that we had a huge turnout today, but this will also be online. So if you have questions, you can just put them underneath the video, and there'll kind of be a FAQ section. So do we have any questions, Kristen?
No questions at this time.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you on the next inspection. Bye.